Impressed. Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jean-Michael Moy and I am your host for today's Product That Counts webinar. Product That Counts is a nonprofit dedicated to enriching the careers of over 500,000 product managers globally. Our mission is to support and empower product managers through a variety of avenues, from our renowned industry awards that recognize outstanding achievements to our educational webinars that you are currently attending today, and our award-winning podcasts that feature product leaders and innovators. I moved to Toronto, I think like 13, 14 years ago, and I've witnessed the emergence of the technology community here over the last years, especially in the AI space. That's why I'm super excited to introduce you to our guests today, who I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, Amber Foucault, who is also based here in Toronto. Amber currently serves as the Vice President of Product Applications at Dayforce, a global human resources technology company. She's here to discuss how, as product leaders, we can integrate AI to accelerate innovation and value to our customers. With over 10 years of senior leadership product experience driving innovation, customer satisfaction, and business growth, Amber oversees core HR benefits, payroll, talent, and workforce management, tax and payments. Today's topic is, I think, really forefront of innovation product management. It's like AI is just not a buzzword. It's something that is really part of the product development process. And it's really transformative for us in terms of revolutionizing the ways that we build products, ideate to delivery, and really build unparalleled value to the customer. So before we dive in, I hand things off to Amber, a few housekeeping items. First, the session will be recorded. The recording will be made available to all the attendees here. Secondly, we really encourage you to ask questions during the session. So feel free to type it into Zoom. And more than anything else, just enjoy the content we're about to present. So without further ado, more than happy to provide a warm welcome to Amber. The stage is yours, Amber.
Thanks, John Michael, and thanks everyone who's here. I'm excited to be able to chat to you today. I'm just gonna get a presentation going here because I do have some slides to help me talk through this. John Michael and I were just talking, and we think it was maybe 8 years ago that we were first working together. And so I've been doing product for a really long time. And the introduction of AI and ML into the product development process is actually really different than what it was when I first started out and we were building mobile applications. And so, where I wanted to start this conversation is like at the Google Sprint process. So back about, I'm going to say 15 years ago now, from a product perspective, when the Google Sprint process came out, it was the hottest thing. And I think it was a really big deal to PMs because it was breaking down how you could digest a problem and get to prototyping a solution really, really quickly. So the idea of it was like born from the fail fast mentality, from validating really quickly. And so if you're new to product right now, you probably don't even know that this was part of the Google Sprint process because it's just how product works today. But at the inception of it back then, it was a very, very different way to assume an agile format and process. And so, it went from understanding, so who is the users, what are their needs, what's the context for it, what are your competitors doing, to like envisioning what those solutions are. So you would diverge and say, well, how would we understand and metabolize this inside of our product? Then you choose an idea, you storyboard it, and you get to the lowest fidelity prototype that you can as quickly as can. You go out to market and you validate it. Did I just describe your product process right now, or your product discovery process right now? Yes, of course I did. It was birthed out of Google. But when this came out, way back when this came out, this was revolutionary stuff. And this is how we all got behind building product. And so what I wanted to be able to do was just compare and contrast. Okay, so you could actually, the idea with this from a Google Sprint perspective was you could get through it in 5 days. Now, if you got through it in 5 days, you were something pretty magical because this is a lot to get through in 5 days. But that was the idea behind it, is that 5 days you could do it. And when we talk about AI and we talk about ML, this idea of getting through it in 5 days or really getting to fail fast quickly kind of has to go out the window because there's just a different process, a different set of questions. So I'm hoping that today what I can leave you with are some ways to approach those problems, different ways to think about those problems. and give you a line of sight into some of the things that like a Dayforce we're up against, because we're doing a lot in the AI space right now. And we're doing a lot with um, very specialized LLMs with very sensitive consumer data, and consumer data that cannot breach the walls of that consumer. So we can't pool that data together. We have to leave that data where it sits inside of our customers' ecosystem. So, first, from a problem perspective, I like to say that there are three key questions that you need to be able to ask yourself. And this comes, at the start of your product discovery process. First, how good do your models need to be to replace humans? And that's a really important question. And certainly before today in product management, it wasn't something you had to typically think about. But if you think about it through the lens of accuracy, like how accurate do you have to be? To be 50% accurate, 100% accurate? The accuracy of your AI may need to be so high that it's basically impossible to build a model for it. What's the cost of being wrong? We've been conditioned in tech to make sure that this is always as low as possible. So, like I said, we say fail fast all the time. But now we're extending tech to a very different set of problems. So from a contrast perspective, if I said, all right, you've got self-driving cars, I don't know if you just saw, but a Toronto-based startup just raised 200 million on self-driving cars. Amazing. They're going to pilot those in Texas, better on the roads in Texas than the roads here, I say, because the cost of being wrong there is a human life. That's the worst case scenario. I'm going to assume for most of the businesses of the folks that are here that it's probably a lot lower than that. Okay, so you get through those first two questions and you have answers that lead you to this third one. Can you audit and validate where you went wrong? This is really important if your problem sits with any kind of regulation or compliance. You need to be able to validate where things went wrong if legal is included inside of it. And so this audit trail and this ability to audit inside of the product process needs to be at the forefront of your thinking. You have to understand and be able to plan for that because your model is going to need that baked into it. So you get through those three. Your next biggest challenge is going to be about scaling. And these are all things that have to happen and conversations with yourself that have to happen before you get to a stage where you're ready to prototype. So again, things that weren't something that you had to focus on when you were doing Google Sprint reviews. So no one really has scaling figured out. So what do I mean by scaling? Well, it's a whole variety of things. So for example, hardware costs, GPUs and TPUs. GPUs are used for training LLMs, like NVIDIA, the A100. Those things cost between $10,000 and $20,000 per unit. So you've also got to deal with servers and storage, and there's massive costs associated with infrastructure to house these data sets. And then there's also data centers. So you've got physical space that you need to start thinking about. There are software costs that go alongside of any AI product. So for example, like frameworks and tools, there are lots of open source opportunities here, but it really depends on what you require. I know from a large enterprise perspective, there's different grades on tooling that you have to think about. So then there's a cost of licensing and subscriptions. Also, when it comes to scaling, you've got to think about your energy consumption. So electricity costs, depending on the size of your LLM, you can consume hundreds of megawatt hours in electricity. Cooling systems are also essential to maintain optimal operating temperatures. Data acquisition and storage, both of those can run you really high costs, especially if your data is proprietary and it requires cleaning. And then there's humans. So humans have that AI skill set and they are really hard to come by. And right now they're really expensive. Anyone who is really at the top of their game in AI is an extremely hot commodity. And then there's cloud costs. So you're going to have to train on the cloud, presumably. So think AWS or Google or Azure. And these guys are going to charge based off of usage. So just to give you an idea, the initial training phase for GPT-3 cost about 4.6 million in cloud costs alone. So by the time you get here in your process, you've really got to understand and have serious conversations about your business model. If you've got a SaaS business, are you going to charge a monthly fee or a flat fee or a per seat basis? Some LLM vendors will charge you a per token or a compute credit. So how are you going to create, a way to bill this back or a way to ensure that you're not just burning cash when it comes to scaling? So I'm giving you all of the things that kind of stand in the way of you making a decision of whether or not AI should be included inside of your product. These are all really, really valid things that you've got to spend some time working through. But let's assume that, before you've decided on the problem and the problem has passed all of those tests and you've decided that you can afford to scale and you know how to scale properly, then you can kind of head into what actually has to happen in order to make sure that you're building an AI product. So again, I got to go back and compare this. If this was a Google Sprint model, and you were going to think about going back to traditional development on clear requirements, I'd say you don't need all those requirements, right? You need to gather and understand what the software requires in order to actually build it. You have to test it with users to see if the problem you're trying to solve is the right problem. So we talk about that from like a stickiness perspective. If you solve the problem once, does someone want to come back and solve the problem again? Those are all challenges you have with traditional software. Those aren't the challenges you have when you're building AI. It's very different. In this case, you're going to want to really understand what those requirements are. If you're trying to automate a process well enough that you can delegate what a human does to a robot, or a software or a tool or something of the like, when it comes to training that model, you're going to, in the eval stage, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about in a second, you have to know these requirements. So you're adjusting for them. And so this needs a ton of attention. You need to understand what unit tests and logging that you have to do. Again, if this was us prototyping basic software, I would say, no, you don't want to think about this in your early stages. But unit tests for LMs are a bit different. Unit testing in software, it's the same concept that you would unit test for in software, but you want to extend them to data clearing and automatic retries. You want to make sure that you can run them every time you change your code, and speed is key. You don't need to be an expert in all the ways that you can run and track these tests, but you have to understand the importance of logging and tracking these along with your development team. Uh, as I mentioned in the last slide, there are so many logging and tracing tools out there right now. I've seen teams build their own data viewing and labeling tools as well. So it's an option, but based off of where your company is at or where you are in your product life cycle, you may have to purchase those tools for license. So, just having that build versus buy conversation at this stage is also a pretty important one. Eval, this is the most important part. And anyone you talk to who's built any kind of AI right now in large enterprise is going to tell you that the mistake they made the first time around was not spending enough time in the evaluation stage. And so I'm going to hammer that one home quite a bit. It's I say all of these things are important, but this one is for sure where I'm going to double down and say it's the most important. If you don't invest enough time here, this is going to really cause your progress to suffer. And I would say that this is what will slow you down from hitting the market or hitting anything from a launch or production ready state. So I've got a good friend who started the Human Feedback Foundation, and their whole ethos is about providing unbiased human reviews on LLMs. So it's a third-party not-for-profit who wants to play a role in the development of ethical AI. So they get humans to review the data, and they spend and literally that's the sole purpose of why they were created. And it's a really important cause for them. But I say that if you're a product manager developing something in the AI space right now, you need to take up that cause. It is so important for humans to review the data, spend as much time with it as you can, live and breathe the results of it, understand what you're seeing in those unit tests. I think probably most people here are familiar with the concept of A/B testing because it exists in software development. This is no different. You can take a lot of approaches here, but the key is really to make sure that you're driving against the right outcomes. And the last one here is like curated or fine-tuned data. Like, to be honest, you can decide how much you want to invest here. I included it because if you're really running a POC and your hope is to bring something to market, then you have to invest here sooner rather than later. So it might as well be on your horizon. There's also a lot of tools and tooling options here that you can rely on. And, again, some of those are open source, but depending on what your data curation needs or how you need this data synthesized, this is really important. So the key takeaway here, examine as much data as possible. Think about these four things as you work to nail down whatever that first beta test or beta facing, user facing product is going to be. And this is getting you into what the virtual cycle of model improvement can be. And that's really what we're talking about when we say an AI product in product discovery. And this is what that cycle can look like. Now, this cycle can be different depending on how sophisticated you are. I don't want to caveat this and say, I've simplified this a lot. I'm not an expert in the end-to-end of this virtuous cycle. I'm a participant in this cycle. And so I've been a participant in this cycle inside of Dayforce and inside of many other conversations that I've had outside of that. But this is what it looks like when we say we want to build something where, in the AI terms, you can fail fast. So this is as close as to the Google Sprint Review as I can bring you in terms of how to build discovery into your AI product. So I'm going to come and start with double clicking on evals again, because like I said, this is a really important part of the process. And it's in yellow because I believe it's where you're going to have to spend your most time. You're doing a performance assessment here. So is the model accurate and effective? Can the model generalize any unseen data? Does it perform well in real world situations? So that's really what's happening inside of that eval stage. And if you kind of see these arrows that I've got that apparently are in a loop of animation right now, which I didn't really realize, but more fun for the eyes. But as it moves from, that eval stage to the fine tuning stage, you've got this improved model. It's actually shooting back up and heading over. And so you want to go back through that unit testing all over again. So that's really the goal of what this visual is trying to do here. So the eval stage is helping you to do error analysis. What are the model's weaknesses? Do you understand the errors? This is where you can do model comparisons. Are you benchmarking other models to understand relative performance? What iterative improvements do you need to make? And how are you ensuring reliability? So can you stress test it to see if the model performs under extreme or rare conditions, which is, obviously super important depending on the nature, again, of the accuracy of your product. You've got to be able to understand issues around ethics and fairness. And this is a really big part when I mentioned on the last slide of that friend of mine that runs that, Human Feedback Foundation, is because ethics and fairness are hard to measure, and there's not a lot of clarity around those. And so it's really important to spend the time here understanding what type of bias detection you need. And this goes back to creating responsible AI. What bias detection is required for your model to be successful, and how are you measuring that success? So this gives you a chance to, really vet your compliance standards here as well. I talked a little earlier about being able to trace back errors. Think of that from an audit perspective. You want to be running that at the eval stage here. We work in a very compliant industry. We make sure people get paid. We funnel about $400 billion in payments through our internal banking system every year. And so us making sure that at every stage we've got traceability and capabilities from an audit perspective are very, very important. This also lets you do some trust building. And so I think we're all really familiar with bringing stakeholders on board and getting early user research and making sure we're doing our testing. That's a standard protocol for PMs. I love it. But when we talk about AI and when we start introducing AI to customers, you've got to really make sure they're on board with the use cases and they understand what the AI is meant to drive towards. And so in this eval stage, it's a really good time to start stretching that out for some user research. So this is the time to be able to go to those internal stakeholders before deploying anything, do that readiness check. Just really make sure you spend the time here from an eval's perspective, because I don't really think I can punch that one home enough. But this is meant to tell you that this part is not quick. This part requires investment. Spend the time here, and you'll have a more mature model and certainly something that is going to have a better shot at surviving in the real world once it's deployed. So, from the experience we've had internally, and certainly in the work that I do with the community, the eval stage is really where a lot of product leads are falling down right now. It's certainly the place where I would suggest the most time gets invested. That's where you're training your data. That's where you're really making sure that you're fine-tuning it. But this is also the part, everyone, where you can have some fun. This is where you should be geeking out on the data, play with the model, make the process your own. I often think of that Google Sprint um, process because at the time it really blew my mind. We didn't think about building software that way. And today we've got a new cycle of how we build software. And it's asking us to slow down and be more careful with how we build it. And I think that there is nothing wrong with that, but it does require a change in the culture of building products and in the culture of understanding what's a good candidate for an AI product. Um, so that's really it for me. I hope that that gave you a few little nuggets as you're going on the path of thinking about what it would take you to be able to build something on as an AI product.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Amber, for presenting that. And I want to ask you a couple of questions, and I also want to give our audience some time to ask questions as well too. So please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. And one of the things I'll say is that I really love the framework that you provided. I think it was like your second last slide in terms of identifying like the requirements, unit testing. And I thought the point around valuation was really key. We actually had a previous session around the importance of data quality as it pertains to AI. So I think the first question I have for you is, in terms of your experiences with building AI, models, have there been any challenges in terms of data quality, refining the data, which essentially will influence the AI algorithms and whatnot that you're trying to build? Like, have you encountered those in the past, and what things would you sort of recommend in terms of getting to a place where you can build things? Because I think sometimes organizations are not quite there yet because they have issues with their data integrity.
I mean, look, like the data integrity is a huge challenge. So one, you really want to make sure that you understand the nature of your data set. So how much proprietary information is in that data set, and what do you need to do to protect that proprietary data? And I think that's the first one. The second one is that if that proprietary data set needs to be cleaned or cleansed in any way, do you have good ways to do that? Do you have people who are experts on being able to handle that? By the time that data set is cleansed, is it large enough to do what you wanted it to do in the first place? And so I kind of go back to it's funny because I did a presentation not that dissimilar to this one for a Women in Tech conference, and one of the women spoke up and said, "You're telling me all the reasons not to build an AI product," and I was like, "I am, because it's really expensive and it's really hard." And when you think about things as simple as data sets, and if you have to purchase that, what happens to it? If you've got to protect it, what happens to it? The size of it, how it needs to flow through, what other data sets it maybe needs to leverage, what happens when those data sets are combined. You're just thinking a lot differently about problems that you didn't have to think about before. So yeah, I think those are all really big questions you have to ask yourself. In our particular cases, We believe in ethical AI. We don't combine any of our customer data. And so we need to be able to make sure that our LLMs are trained on very specific tasks, and that we've got really well documented requirements to be able to service that, to even test those data sets. And so that's where we spend most of our time to make sure that we're covering it off. So if you kind of think of what that looks like in an applied way, well, if you wanted to ask an HR professional about what your benefits package looks like, well, we can query that information and we can serve that information up via AI. And that's a very simple task, but now that email no longer needs to go to your HR administrator, and we can deliver that to you inside of, your portal experience at your organization. And so those are really simple things that we can start to knock off and get through. And then we build trust on that. We understand the way that we're consuming those data sets. Then we leverage that information and continue to build.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And evaluation, I totally agree with you. That's the thing that it's, it's like whether it's failure, learnings, I think it's all important to really analyze it, using human curation. And I mean, one of the things I've also discovered too is that, a lot of organizations, when they invest in AI, they have a sense of AI governance. So one of the things that I would love to get insights on is, what, like, as companies, product managers are dipping into, AI to sort of deliver outcomes and to sort of scale. I think when is the right time to consider governance? Because you had mentioned there's like a third party that does like AI type, they do some type of ethics that, which is great. And I do think that having an outside party is sometimes helpful, because sometimes when you're invested in the business, you can get skewed in terms of, is this really ethical? But I'm really achieving my business outcomes. So I'd love to get your insights in terms of when should, product organizations invest in governance, and what is, from your point of view, best, I guess, best practices in terms of instilling the governance.
Yeah, if you kind of recall, so this could be a whole topic we could go deep into, because, and I've got a lot of strong feelings here, because I want to build ethical AI, and I want that to be the foundation of how we use and wield this power for good. And so I talked a little bit about what are some of those three questions you should ask yourself, like how good do your models need to be to replace humans? What's the cost of being wrong? And can you audit and validate where you went wrong? And I think how good do your models need to be to replace humans, and what is the cost of being wrong? Start to dip their toe inside of that ethical realm of, like, what's the cost of being wrong? Is it we've exposed personal banking information? Is it we have provided social insurance numbers to people who shouldn't have had them? Like, what are the things that you're actually going to be able to expose? And then if that's the case, what are the clear requirements that you need to have in place to be able to safeguard against that? And then when you get to that eval stage, it's like, okay, who are the stakeholders that need to say, we agree with our approach to this and we believe we've protected? So, like, we've got a chief privacy officer, she gets involved in all of these things that we're doing, because it's really important for her to feel comfortable with the level of privacy we're creating inside of those LLMs. And so I think it really depends on where that sort of sits. The human bias part of it is, like, in that eval stage, as you're going through the data, as you're really digging into it, have people from different backgrounds, people from different, create diversity in the eyes and the discussions that happen around the outputs of that model. And I think that that's also another really important piece, that if you're a responsible product manager, that you're thinking about the fact that, hey, maybe your ethics are not everyone else's ethics. And a cross section of this is going to be super important. Yeah.
That's totally fair. There's some questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask some questions here.
Sure.
So from John, what could be some of the metrics that we should track against as part of the eval and code testing? And secondly, when can we say that they are production ready?
I mean, John, I wish there was like an easy answer on the production ready side of things. There really isn't. I think that it depends on what your threshold is for accepting, um, for accepting what model outputs are. So this is the part where, I say get stakeholders involved and really make sure you understand. Some of it you're going to have to say, well, the model's going to learn and we're going to train it and move it and we're going to make it iterative. And so we're willing to accept these types of answers for now. And so are our users. And so this is where you've got to get really creative of what those thresholds need to be, depending on the type of product it is that you're definitely building, because I think that's a really big part of it. When it comes to metrics, again, I'm gonna go back to, you know, how the model, how unseen data is being brought into the model and how it's really working inside of real world situations, which you can only get as you continue to play with it. I mean, from my perspective, that unseen data becomes a really big part of trusting the product on the other side of it. So from an accuracy and effective point of view, what could alter or change the answer or the output of whatever your model looks like. What and how are you handling errors would be another one. And what's the detriment of those errors? So again, it all goes back to how serious it needs to be. I don't know if there's a blanket statement of what it is that you could track from a metrics perspective, but I do think that the big questions that you have to ask yourself are what happens when this is unleashed in real world situations, and that only happens through like significant evals and testing.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Second question is from Pasorn. In terms of detailed solution design, I think we need the right person to design it. How are technical product managers and any other roles nominated in this AI product integration?
Yeah, I mean, like this entirely depends on, I think, again, your organization. So, design in my mind, plays a critical role in all of this. I've always looked at design as being about how it works, not what it looks like. And if how it works is going to be and again, this depends entirely on what type of product you're building, but if how it works is going to help build trust and adoption, then you're really going to need to lean in from a design perspective. So I'm right with you. You need the right person to design it. Um, how are the technical product manager or any other roles nominated in AI product integration? It does depend. Our PMs play a big role throughout this whole thing, particularly like from understanding those requirements to unit testing to evals to fine tuning, like all the way out through that cycle that I just talked about. Certainly, they play a really big role. Our PMs are also not all technical PMs. Some of them are learned. It's funny. I was at a dinner. I was at a dinner last weekend with OpenAI, with the VP of product for enterprise OpenAI. And it's funny because his advice, it was a room full of like VPs and CPOs, all of us in some sort of stage of AI product development. And he was like, the thing that you can do is just play with it daily. Like that was his advice. Just get in there and play with it daily. And so I don't think any of us have been traditionally trained in AI because, well, we're old now, but also, it's a newer technology and you've got to get a chance to get in there and see what it's like to build it. And so from my perspective, getting your hands dirty is the best way to integrate into that process. So hopefully that answers that for you.
And I'll also chime in too, Amber. Like in my current company, AppDirect, we launched a enterprise AI platform which enables companies to create chatbots and language models to really automate their businesses. And one of the things that we've been trying to figure out within our organization is how do we take these capabilities and achieve the outcomes that we want. I think it's like that the four steps that you've done, we've actually been asking ourselves the same question. It's like, what are the things that we want to achieve? Do we have the right data? How do we evaluate? And the way that we are operating now, it's a sort of a partnership where you have business product managers who are like focused on their outcomes, OKRs to achieve certain outcomes, and then we have AI, like technical product managers who are more focused on integrating with our APIs so that way they can take whatever the inputs, like the data inputs are, to then build those respective models. So I do think, to your point, Amber, it is part of it is based on how your organization is developing AI. Because I think there's a part of it, it's like, I think there's a bit of the question there, and maybe if Pisona, you want to elaborate more. It sounds like, how do other folks within the organization get involved with AI? And I think thinking about how you instill it into your organization, how you scale it, how you build best practices, a lot of the things that Amber has highlighted is like those are the things that will determine what that model looks like in terms of learning, testing, adoption, and scaling. So, but I think that's a really good question. So next question is from Douglas. So how do we reduce the risk of non-determinate results while adding a language learning model to the software development cycle? What is more appropriate, to use a small or more specific language model?
Yeah, you know what? Good question. I'll answer the second part first. Is like, when is it appropriate to use a small and more specific language model? It's like, it's kind of, from my perspective, it's sort of like taking a sword to a gunfight, or whatever that expression is. We use a fairly small language model because we don't need to use a large one. We use a small one because we're dealing with the human capital management domain. So I need a language model that understands human capital management. I don't need a language model that understands, you know, how a recipe in a kitchen works. So it doesn't have to have every variation of a capability from a data set. So for us, we use a smaller one. We can train that. I talked a lot about scaling and how important scaling is. It means we're saving on costs from a scaling perspective. It also means that we can focus on that eval part with a lot more determination in terms of what those outputs are. So I think that's a really big part of how you're thinking about the model size. Non-deterministic results, I don't want to oversimplify this. There's again, it completely depends on what data set you're choosing. It completely depends on what problem set you're going after. But going back to that clear requirements piece, I would say that that's a really big part of it. So ensuring you can understand how to detail out what that process is that you're looking for, staying laser focused on it, and really making sure that you've got a clear set of requirements and a clean data set. And those two should do a lot of work in helping that non-deterministic, but it also depends, again, on how detailed you're going to be with that model.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you a different question, Amber. So if you were to if you were to go into a crystal ball, look at a crystal ball and say 5 years from now, where do you see AI going in terms of companies adopting AI, the evaluation process, product managers using AI? Where do you see that going moving forward?
Yeah, I'll talk to you a little bit about the commercialization of it, because I think we went through a pretty intense hype cycle on AI over the last 2 years. And I was in startup 2 years ago, and I saw the VC cycles that were happening and where money was getting spent. And if you had AI in your company's like name or capabilities, I mean, that's where everyone was investing. And so large organizations, enterprise organizations, got really involved in AI and started to spend a ton of money trying to figure out how they included AI in their products. Okay, so that's where we're at. Now that we've figured that part out, now it's about where's the ROI on those products. And I think we're at a stage right now where we're going to start to refine and understand what customers are willing to pay for when it comes to AI. And this is going to be an interesting game for us to play, because you've really got to add value for customers to want to pay for what you've got. And so, I'm in B2B, so I'm in SaaS. Of course, we're going to figure that one out really quickly and try to understand where we can build the most value into our product ecosystem using that. I think where this is going to lead us to is a path of optimization and efficiency. And so how do we get products that help drive productivity for users? And how do we demonstrate and monetize that, demonstrate the value that's driving and monetize it. And so I think that's where we're headed in the short term. And that doesn't sound very dreamy or opportunistic, but I think it's really pragmatic. I think in the long term, we're going to really struggle with privacy in those data sets. And I think that's going to put a bigger blocker in the way in terms of where AI starts to transform big business, because it's messy and it is really difficult to figure out. But the drive towards optimization will be, I think, what clears the pathway.
Yeah, no, the data piece is really interesting because there's just so many things going on the data privacy side, GDPR, um, data breaches, data security, third party cookies, for example. It's just a lot of things there that just create a lot of, I think, barriers in terms of really, scaling and scaling certain aspects of AI. So I do agree with that assessment. I want to go back to something you said, Amber, which was these are the reasons why you don't do AI. It's expensive. There's a lot of things that you do in evaluation. So, like, do you ever see, like, and I've heard two aspects. One is if you're not in AI right now, like you're dead. Like there's that one point of view. And then the other point of view is like, well, be careful where you invest because to your point, the ROI, you may not get the ROI that you may want based on, various variables, things that you can control, some things you can't control, and the velocity of evaluation learning. So I guess my question is, where do you think we'll eventually land it? It's just totally like, it's like this, it's just more like, just kind of like to get your point of view on that. Like,
It's so like I joke about it, right? Like, AI is really hard. Like, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. But you should do it. Like the funny thing was, and like I don't know if and I keep going back to this, but like 10 years ago, even longer, when people were building mobile apps, they were hard to build as well. Like it was hard to figure those out, right? And so like pick your heart, I guess, right? So the reason why I think I come at AI with the warning messages that I fire about it is because I think people assume it's easy. And it just isn't. And it requires a ton of investment, and your mistakes are more expensive. And so, like, I look at this and I say, you 100% should invest in AI. Your company should be thinking about how is AI going to eat your product? Because it will. And like whether it does that now or whether it does that in 5 years, it's going to happen. So, what's your plan for it? But while you're planning for it, don't expect a quick fix. Like, don't expect you not to have to invest in this. Don't expect you to create an AI product overnight that's going to be a tremendous success. The way that like apps were in, 2012 and 2015. And like, you think of all the success that we saw from many different startups, even up until, you know, 2019. So I just think it's like, I look at it as like a warning flag. We know more now than we did before. Be responsible with the creation of this and really think and plan for this one, because it's a lot of effort.
yeah, and I thought the app example was really good. I mean, apps, everyone's creating a mobile app, and then you have the saturation of apps, where everyone's just app fatigue, where everyone's downloading apps, and then it's like, how do I make my app more prominent than others, and then what's the value of an app versus a website, which it's a separate conversation that you and I can go separately. But I do think that that is a really good example because I think I think there's a learning curve with AI in terms of companies and as well as the industry as a whole. But then eventually there's going to be this settling down, which I think what you're hinting on now is like, okay, now that we've had a lot of great learnings, we've learned from an industry wide, from a company wide, what are the things that are actually tangible that we can actually optimize to your point and productionize moving forward, and then eventually maybe monetize to add, to that ROI respectively. So no,
Yeah.
I thought that was a really great example. Um, I actually no, I like to leave it on that. If no one has any questions on that, so
Yeah.
um, But in closing, I would like to say, Amber, thank you very much. Like, it's really great to just connect first, like connect after so long.
Yeah.
But more importantly, just providing your perspective in terms of, how AI has been part of your journey and kind of where we sit right now. And I think it's a really good reality check in terms of what we learned at this point, learnings, failures, and then the opportunities going forward. And I think we'll continue having this conversation, in years to come.
Yeah.
So, and so to the audience, on behalf of the audience, I want to thank you for just making time to speak about AI, and really more importantly, just continuing the product conversation. So thank you, Amber, for just your presentation. It was really fantastic.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me. And great questions to the audience. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all.
Okay.
Cheers. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.